back once again. So, we've leveled up.
Wow.
We have become adventurers with a tool set we can take with us as we adventure into the quest of philosophy. As we learn more terms and relationships between those key terms, we have a way of applying it, a way of using it, a way that we can benefit from using it by putting it into the power of the dialectics. It has the power to awaken us to the realm of being and grasp the ideas, especially truth. And hey, we care about truth, don't we? So, and what are we doing? We're engaged in an intellectual yoga or a rational yoga, what the a Hindu tradition might call a jnana yoga. We are becoming rational. We are pulling ourselves out of our barbarianism, out of our ignorance. We are evolving as human beings. Human beings haven't been around for a very long time, evolutionarily speaking. We're at the stage where we've evolved into the level of nous and ousia, where we have what we need, and logos, language. We have what we need to evolve to the next level of evolution. We know what we're doing to the planet. We know what we're doing to each other. We know that we are acting like barbarians irrationally to each other, to ourselves, to particular selves, to all people on the planet, and to everything, even the planet itself. We could do a dialectic on humans. How do we relate to ourselves? Do we hate ourselves? Do we have depression? Do we have anxiety? Are we in ignorance? How do we relate to a particular other? How do we relate to, I don't know, the poor? How do we relate to other countries? Are we kind to the poor? Do we punish the poor? Are things more expensive for the poor? Are we scamming the poor? Are we hurting the poor? Are we killing people in impoverished situations? How do we relate to all human beings? Are we living in coordination, in harmony, in likeness, in similitude? Are we acting in a just way with all human beings? And finally, everything. How are we relating to everything? How are we relating to the planet? Are we killing the planet? So this is a dialectic on humans. You could say that's a dialectic on humans if they don't have the dialectic. Now that's if the dialectic does not exist for humans, what follows? Our current world. Why? Because even though this book was written 2,000 years ago, even more, it's been buried, it's been lost. We know this. We know over the last, thousands of years, couple of thousand years, books have been burned, libraries have been burned, things have been banned. Even education has been, in the past, a way for the church to, professors are those that profess the faith. Think about how lectures are done. It's like a church. Everyone in these big lecture theaters, someone at the front, some authority preaching the official doctrine. Often, the books that we lived by, like the Bible, wouldn't even be in a language which you could read for yourself. The Dark Ages, 529 AD, when the academy was shut down and these people studying this stuff were killed or exiled. This stuff has been buried. But doing a simple dialectic on humanity, whether or not it has philosophy, we can see something significant. If philosophy and dialectics doesn't exist, our world, how do we relate to ourselves? How do we relate to each other? How do we relate to all humans? How do we relate to the planet? It's a dialectic. That's exercise 3, right? Self, particular other, all others, everything. So we can understand our situation. Our human situation is understandable.
Wow.
And what happens when we seek to understand our situation? Well, we have to use the dialectic applied to the highest ideas. That's what we just did. But we also have to keep in mind there will be what? objections, counterattacks from people who have been convinced that important things are not knowable. Someone appeared convincing to them and convinced them also that you can't know what's significant. Hey, don't solve problems, you idiot. Shut up and just die. Don't awaken. Don't benefit. So we've got to keep in mind those objections because they will come up. It's part of being human. There's a reason why it's difficult. It has been difficult to address these problems, even though we've had this text for 2,000 years in black and white. So keep in mind there'll be objections. And finally, what's the third thing? The triad. The triad of the power of the dialectics. Realize that what we're doing is to know the self. All of this is somehow connected ultimately to the ultimate, the self. Somehow this is all in self, or all of self, or all leading to self. Those are the three parts. So what do we have? Remember how we started with our skill trees? As adventurers, we have skill trees. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 skill trees. 1, we started off by saying, what's the one philosophy? 2, we started by saying earlier in the series, what's the positive and what is its negative reflection? What's philosophy and what isn't it? What's destiny and what's fate? We add those in, populate that tree, add the Christmas lights to that tree. Level up down that direction.
Wow.
Thank you. Number 4, we talked about the 4 parts of the dialectic. SS, SO, and DDAS. Right? That's a 4-part, a quadrant. Look for 4s. So add that to a tree. By the way, we can apply all of this to the dialectic we just discovered. We are getting an understanding of one term by using 2 terms to begin with, a particular subject and a particular other.
Wow.
We have 3 things we have to do in the meantime. 3 things we have to keep our mind fixated on as we do this. So 3 preconditions. What are they? The lesser, keep in mind the objections that come up, the counterattacks. The greater, use the dialectic to define what's most significant, humanity or the greatest ideas. And number 3, keep your mind fixed that this is all about the self. We've got a 1, a 2, and a 3. And what's the 4 from the dialectic? Well, it's the 4 terms, isn't it? SS, SO, OO, OS, or DDAS. That's cool. We've got a dialectic covers all of those trees. The 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4. So isn't that cool? Now, if you like, you could apply the 2-part. We've done what happens to humanity if philosophy or dialectics doesn't exist, our situation.
What in the heck are we talking about here?
This is where we're at. And what happens for humanity if philosophy does exist for us? So see how we can use the same structure, the same way of thinking and understanding to understand what's most significant for everybody. Always. It's universal. It's a principle, a way of learning, seeing, adventuring, wherever you find yourself. Hey, if you happen to reincarnate tomorrow on a faraway galaxy, 1 billion years in the future, if you've learned this in this lifetime, you can take it with you. You can navigate that galaxy. You could deal with those aliens. You could solve the problems they're facing or address them with this. It's a kind of learning that we can take with us. And this is important because as humans, we don't really recognize or we don't talk about the fact that we're going to die. We're going to go somewhere, number 1. We came from somewhere, or rather, we came from somewhere, 1. We've got to do something while we're here, and we're going somewhere after we die. In the world of becoming, that's just a fact of life. To be rational is to address that fairly. with the greatest reflection and understanding. We are irrational because we ignore these. We've had a collective agreement to not pay attention to them. It's irrational. It's ignorance. But if we apply our higher understanding to these questions, and our higher understanding now includes an understanding of understanding itself, an understanding of dialectics, we can apply the dialectics to these three questions. One of them is, where are we going? Well, if this way of thinking and seeing and addressing problems extends to anything everywhere, you can take it with you wherever you're going. That's important. That points out that we're now addressing a kind of learning that is meaningful beyond even just this life. Rational kind of approach to learning. Something you can take with you. It's very important. Also, what should we be doing while we're here? Well, wouldn't it be learning something that is significant beyond you in this lifetime? Shouldn't that be what we're doing? Also, shouldn't we be solving the problems we're facing? Shouldn't we be evolving as a species? Shouldn't we be caring for the planet, caring for each other, caring for individuals? Would that be rational? How do we solve problems and care for each other? Oh, dialectics? Using our greatest understanding to address the problems, understand them properly. So it sounds like where we're going, somewhere where we need some sort of learning that we can take with us. Can't take the physical with us. And what we should be doing here are both questions that can be addressed with dialectics. This kind of learning. And where do we come from? Well, I don't know. Maybe that's part of it too. Maybe we came from somewhere that appreciated the need to learn this. Maybe somewhere that could be benefited, a kind of existence, non-physical existence that in which we recognize that we would benefit by kind of learning in this way. It's time to address those questions. And now we can, because we're philosophical adventurers. Yay.
Wow. Wow.
So we have our dialectic. Let's go back into the text and see what Parmenides says about it. How fun. Lots of good points. It might even be just reading it again because it's so beautiful. Let's do a bit of reading again because it seems really good. Given our new understanding and our reflection of the dialectic and the logos and how we can apply it to bikes, humanity, and the most rational questions of why we're here, what we should be doing, where we're going, where we came from. Given that kind of reflection, let's reread what we've just read and see if we can see it in a new light. Let's see if something more comes to light for us.
Wow.
Parmenides. Nevertheless, O Socrates, these and many other consequences besides these must be so in relation to the ideas. The difficulties that he had to begin with, trying to figure out what the ideas were. If the ideal selves of the real beings exist, and if one determines that each one is a certain ideal self. Remember, all three parts. These consequences happen. Objections. If you try and define the real beings, number 2. And you try and determine that they're each a certain thing of self, number 3. 3 levels. The objections of the physical world, defining the ideas of being, recognizing it's all of the ultimate oneself. So that one who hears these words is puzzled and questions whether selves do exist, or if they do exist, that they exist in the highest degree, so that it appears abundantly necessary that selves must be unknown by human nature. That's the objections. That's the big puzzle. And whoever speaks in this way may appear to be saying something important, and which we just now said may be thought of as being an extraordinary statement. And by being unable to be persuaded, people who say you can't know these things can appear to be saying something clever. And yet, on the other hand, it falls to the ability of an individual of very good natural disposition to be able to learn. What kind of learning? That which reaches beyond life. This life. To be able to learn that there is a certain kind or genus of every idea, and that of self-ousia, according to itself. And so, on the other hand, they will deserve even greater admiration, who, having made this discovery, shall be able to teach yet another person how to thoroughly well distinguish these particulars in a sufficient way. What have we been talking about with the dialectics? How to distinguish the particulars in a sufficient way. Socrates says, I agree with you entirely, O Parmenides, for you speak according to my nous. Parmenides. But nevertheless, in turn, O Socrates, if anyone indeed does not permit the ideas of real beings to be, by not keeping their mind fixed on the recent objections and others like them, does not define each one of the particular ideas, then they will not have anywhere to turn their dianoia. They won't have anything to do, they won't have any way to turn their understanding. While they do not allow that the idea of each one of the real beings is always of the self. If they don't do this, they will entirely destroy the power of dialectics. You speak the truth. Well, okay then, smart guy. What will you do? I mean, he didn't say that. That's me. You speak the truth. Socrates, what will you do then in relation to philosophy? In what way will you turn your mind if you are ignorant of these particular ideas? Socrates says, at the present time I do indeed appear not to see in any way at all. In what way I should turn my mind? Parmenides, for prior to exercising yourself, O Socrates, you should endeavor beforehand to define what is beautiful, just, and good in each one of the ideas. Okay, define them. How? We have a way of doing it now, don't we? For just now the following also came to my mind while hearing you dialogue with Aristotle here. Therefore, on the one hand, the impulse by which you are compelled to the Logos is beautiful and divine. You can be sure of that.
Wow.
Whereas on the other hand, you must also collect yourself together by exercising more in that way, which appears to be useless to the many and is called by them empty talk. For if you do not while you're still young, the truth will utterly elude you. Wow.
Wow. Wow.
What then, O Parmenides, is the way of this exercise? The way is just that which you heard Zeno practicing, except that I was also quite pleased with this and what you said to him, because you would not allow him to look upon the wandering that exists among the objects of sight, nor the wandering that exists in relation to them, but to consider according to those which one can grasp, especially by the Logos. Grasp especially by the Logos. And in this way, one would be led to see the ideas.
Wow.
For it appears to me, says Socrates, that in this way it may indeed be shown without difficulty that the beings experience both like and unlike and everything else that exists. Anything else that exists. Quite rightly indeed. But it is also necessary that, besides this, you should still also suppose the following: to consider not only the consequences resulting from the hypothesis whether each ideal self that you are hypothesizing exists, but also the consequences resulting from hypothesizing if this ideal self does not exist, if you are to be exercised in this way. We can see it now, can't we? We recognize what he's doing. We can see through our understanding and recognize what he's saying. We can follow, we've learned. Oh, if it doesn't or does exist, that's what we're hypothesizing? Well, I know what you mean by hypothesizing. It's the what-if universe. I know what you mean by if it doesn't and does exist, because that's the two categories of the dialectic. Socrates isn't quite there yet.
What?
He says, in what way do you mean? Parmenides says, such as this: if you should wish to exercise yourself in the same hypothesis which Zeno hypothesized, 1. If the many beings exist, what must result both to the many selves in being, in relation to selves, and in relation to the one? And again, if the many beings exist, what must result for the one in relation to itself and in relation to the many? And in turn, if many do not exist, consider in turn what will result both in relation to the one and to the many, both in relation to selves and each other. That was our first exercise. Sounds complicated the way he says it, but because we've done the work, we can see it. And again.
Wow.
And again. In turn, one should hypothesize if likeness exists, or if it does not exist. What will result for each of the hypotheses, both to the selves that are being hypothesized and to the others, both in relation to selves and in relation to each other? Number 2, for likeness. Number 3, the same logos must also be applied to the unlike, to motion, to rest, to generation and dissolution, and to the existence and the non-existence of self. And in one logos concerning that which should be hypothesized as always being and not being, and anything else that undergoes any experience whatsoever. One must consider the consequences in relation to self and in relation to each one of the others being considered, which anyone may set up for this purpose, and in relation to many, and similarly in relation to everything. Again, hard to read unless we unpack it. The many, the anything, what one sets up for this purpose, 3 kinds of others. Whether your subject is always being or always not being. For these ideas and anything that you want to pick. Finally, in turn, how others are related to self, and how any other, or selves, and to any other which you may select. To all of those others, how each one of them are related to themselves and to all of those others. Whether you hypothesize the subject of your hypothesis, that which always is, or non-being, if it exists or if it doesn't exist. If you care, do all this. There's 4 exercises. If you care about being perfectly exercised to do what? Thoroughly behold the truth. Wow.
Wow. Wow.
How? In a masterful way. This is what you want to do if you want to get this.
Wow.
What do we want? Thoroughly behold the truth in a masterful way. That's where we're at.